We have finally reached our last chapter of the semester, chapter 19, which deals with the reproductive system. So in this part one, we're going to talk just a little bit about reproduction in general. We're going to go through the male reproductive system, and you'll see in part two where we cover the female reproductive system. So to start out, let's take a look at some functions. Now, it kind of goes without saying that the reproductive system is for the purpose of reproducing, for producing offspring, passing down genetic information. So the functions that you see are a little bit more specific in the context of the process of reproduction. And the first is the production of specialized sex cells called gametes. In the male, the gamete is the sperm, and in the female, it's the egg. And these two cells are very different from one another. Sperm are smaller, and they are motile, which means that they can move through their environment. They can swim around. Egg cells, on the other hand, are larger, and they have a lot more inside of them. All of the cellular components, organelles, nutrients, enzymes, anything that we would find in a typical cell is housed in the egg. So the egg kind of contributes a little bit more as far as the cellular structures. When the sperm and the egg come together, that is a process called fertilization. And when we say they come together, what we're really combining or uniting here is the genetic information from both of those cells. Each of those cells carries 50% of the genetic information, which when we put that all together will make for the, the full set of DNA, okay, a full set of genes. And fertilization immediately results in a fertilized egg, which is called a zygote. So that's a single cell containing the DNA from both sperm and egg. And then that zygote is going to go on to develop into the multi-celled organism that we are. And so number 3 talks about or mentions development. There are various stages. We'll go through just kind of very superficially towards the end some of the stages of human development. And then during the course of development, of course, we need nourishment. Okay, so feeding the embryo and the fetus later on. Now the fourth function kind of occurs really all throughout from the very beginning to the very end of reproduction, and even outside of the context of actually producing the zygote. And that's the production of hormones. So organs of the reproductive system do let out a number of different types of hormones. Some of them are related to pregnancy, some of them are just kind of maintenance of just normal reproductive function. And so we'll encounter a number of those hormones along the way as we go. Now, as far as the structures that are involved here, we have primary and secondary sex organs. Primary sex organs are known as the gonads. These would be the actual, I guess, reproductive organs, the testes and the ovaries. And the reason why those are designated primary is because those are the organs in which the sperm and the egg are produced. So the sperm are produced in the testes and the egg in the ovaries. The secondary sex organs include kind of everything else. So that would be like various ducts through which secretions are released, glands. In the male, we have the penis, the uterus in the female. And so it's not that they are any less important to the whole framework of reproduction, but like I said, the primary organs are where those reproductive cells come from. Now, when we define sex or gender, there are a number of kind of qualifications here. There are a number of contributions to reproduction. Sex is defined by the production of the gametes. So in humans, males produce sperm, females produce eggs. The chromosomes that one inherits, and we'll get into that in a little bit, and also the role in fertilization and development. So again, in humans, it's the female who carries the developing embryo. In a more visible way, we have what are called secondary sex characteristics that further distinguish the sexes. Okay, so that would be like facial hair in men, maybe a more muscular build in men, breasts in the female, and again, more of the physical attributes that would identify one gender or another. So I want to look at sexual differentiation as it occurs early on in embryonic development. In other words, how the reproductive organs come about and when that happens. Up until about 5 to 6 weeks in utero, the fetus is sexually undifferentiated, at least structurally, anatomically. We cannot tell male from female because there are a number of structures present that could lead to the development of either one. You'll see some pictures down at the bottom. The top one in the middle there is kind of the non-gender specific stage where we have some of the structures such as the gonadal ridges. And the gonadal ridges, you can see the leader line there is pointing to that blue area. They develop right next to a couple of ducts of what will eventually be the kidney that's called the mesonephros. But these two ducts include what's called the mesonephric or Wolffian duct and the paramesonephric or Mullerian duct. And so both of these structures or sets of structures are present again up until about 5 to 6 weeks. And what's going to happen eventually is, and this will depend upon basically the genes of this person, the mesonephric duct will eventually lead to the development or kind of become the reproductive tract in males. Okay, so if we're destined, this person, is genetically determined to be a male, then the mesonephric duct will persist. And I'm sorry, the mesonephric duct will persist, and the paramesonephric duct will degenerate. On the flip side of the coin, then, if you're genetically determined to be a female, then the paramesonephric duct is the one that stays, and the mesonephric duct degenerates. Okay, so essentially you kind of have both at the beginning, and then some of those structures eventually go away, and some of them remain and develop into the more mature system. Now, I've kind of mentioned, genetically determined, and so this is how the genetic determination of gender or sex takes place. It's in the chromosomes. And so we have, and picture on the right hand side there shows what's called a karyotype, which is kind of a layout of all of the human chromosomes. We have 23 pair of chromosomes, and that last pair, which I have circled in red there, is designated the sex chromosomes because these two chromosomes determine gender. There is an X chromosome and a Y chromosome that determines gender. And there are a couple of combinations of these chromosomes that we can inherit that will determine whether we are chromosomally male or female. And so if you look at the other pictures on the left there, the way that sex is determined is that females carry two X chromosomes and males carry an X and a Y. Okay, and this just the combination that eventually comes together when sperm and egg meet, that's going to create the pair. Okay, so XX is female and XY is male. And we're going to talk a little bit more about one of those chromosomes on the next slide. One of the things I want you to just notice here is that both males and females actually have an X chromosome. Okay, and then the Y seems to be kind of the what is different, what is really different about what one has or doesn't. So we're going to come back to that Y chromosome. The other chromosomes that you see in the picture, the other 22 pair, the non-sex chromosomes, are called autosomes, and they are the same for both males and females. Now, once you have the combination of chromosomes in place, and let's go back to that Y chromosome, because that was really the one that was different between the two, the male and female, given that they both at least have one X. The Y chromosome, and if you look back at that karyotype that I had on the previous slide, the Y chromosome was there, so that was a male karyotype. And you might notice that that sex chromosome pair, the chromosomes were very different looking. There's one that's kind of tall and there's one that was significantly smaller. And the significantly smaller one is the Y chromosome. It has a very different sequence of genes on it than does the X. And in particular, there's a region on the Y chromosome, a gene, called the sex-determining region. Okay, it's called the SRY gene sometimes. And that gene codes for a protein known as the TDF, or the testis determining factor. Okay, now those are kind of some big names there, but what that boils down to is that there is a special gene on the Y chromosome that is not present on the X chromosome. Okay, which means that males will have this gene and females will not. And the way that our genes kind of manifest themselves, okay, the way that the information that's contained in our DNA and on our chromosomes becomes more visible is through the production of proteins. So due to the presence of this gene, males then will produce this testis determining protein, essentially. Okay, and that's going to then actually have a hand in the direction of the development. So that's going to participate in a process that will lead to the formation of a male reproductive system as opposed to a female reproductive system. So assuming the SRY gene is there and this protein is being made, between 8 and 9 weeks of development, the presence of this protein and because of the gene, the testes will start to secrete very high levels of testosterone. Okay, and that's the main male hormone. It's probably one that you've heard of before. So the secretion of the high levels of testosterone come from the fact that this particular gene is present on the chromosome and that gene is causing the production of this protein. And high levels of testosterone lead to the production of the male system and the formation of the male reproductive structures. If there is no SRY gene and therefore no protein, what we're going to have is the development of the female reproductive system. Okay, so if you notice the females carry the two X chromosomes, that means that the Y chromosome is absent in the female. And that's really the key to everything. It's that Y chromosome, as little as it is, it's got a really important, or some really important information on it. And that is, if it's there, we get a male. If it's not there, we get a female. So I want to get into an exploration of the male reproductive system and male reproduction and kind of how it works as far as the sperm development and such. So let's start with our primary sex organ, which is the testes. And the testes in males are located outside of the body cavity. There's a little sac called the scrotum. And the testes, they actually don't start there. We'll see in a minute how they make their way down. But ultimately, they end up outside of the abdomen. And the reason for that is because sperm development actually requires a temperature that's about 1 to 2 degrees lower than regular body temperature. So that creates and supplies that environment. Now, the testes secrete things. One of those things is sperm. So we have sperm production, and release from the testes. And the testes also secrete that testosterone, okay, that male hormone. And I meant to mention on the other slide as well, when we were looking at the high level of testosterone leading to male development, I just want to make clear that females have testosterone as well. It's not that testosterone is for males and later on we get to estrogen, that's the female one. In fact, both of those reproductive hormones, testosterone and estrogen, are present in both genders. It's just a matter of the levels. So in males, testosterone is just at a much higher level than it is in females. And that's because of the gene and the protein, and then of course the development of the testes. So in a sense, since testosterone is a hormone, in part the testes can be considered endocrine in nature. So the cells that secrete that would be endocrine cells. But another secretion really is the sperm that are produced, or the sperm that are produced here. And so that would be considered an exocrine secretion, because those sperm are actually deposited right into a little duct, and you can see this. The pictures are showing a cross section of some of the one of the tubules that make up the testis. They're called seminiferous tubules, and the lumen of the tubule is where the sperm end up. Now I mentioned that that the testes do not start out outside of the body, but in fact they actually start in the abdominal cavity. I'm not going to go through the whole process in detail here, but the descent of the testes as they begin to lower starts as early as 6 weeks into development. And at about 7 months into development, they pass through what's actually a little opening in the abdominal wall called the inguinal canal, and they pass into the scrotum. Okay, so that again gives them that temperature appropriate environment for the production of sperm. Now, sperm production in the testis is known as spermatogenesis. Okay, genesis is like the beginning of, so this is just the beginning of the sperm. And there are several stages that the sperm go through during the course of their development. And these stages are visible in and are located in those seminiferous tubules within the testis. And we sort of, if you look, there's a small picture at the top there, which is showing, similar to this previous slide, kind of a cross-section of one of those tubules. And there's a general pattern of the earliest stages being on the very outside of the tubules, and then the later stages kind of moving more towards the middle until the actual sperm cells are seen in the lumen, or the space within the tubule. You will see the progression of the sperm development on the left-hand side with those red arrows. We start with what's called a primordial germ cell. These are kind of like stem cells because they are very, at this point, they are not differentiated. They're not specialized at all. But those primordial germ cells will, about the first 5 to 6 weeks, eventually turn into what's called a spermatogonia. And so this is really just the earliest stage of the sperm, what will eventually be the sperm. You'll notice sperm is a prefix all the way through. Okay, then we go from the spermatogonia to the primary spermatocytes. Then we get to the secondary spermatocytes, and finally to the then to the spermatids, and then finally to the spermatozoa. Okay, spermatozoan is just singular, but spermatozoa is plural. And that's the equivalent of the sperm cell. Those are the ones that you see at the very bottom of the picture with the little tails. Okay, those are all mature sperm. They can swim around. There are genetic differences between the different stages of the sperm. There are some visual differences between them, which we're not going to go through in detail. But essentially, this is following the course of the development of kind of that precursor cell all the way to the sperm itself. Now in males, we do have several glands, which are known as accessory glands, and so I want to look at some of the other secretions that join the sperm in males. So we have, and I noticed I missed an S in accessory, I apologize for that. We have the seminal fluid is what is released during ejaculation. Only about 5% of the seminal fluid is sperm. Now that's a small percentage, but realistically, the numbers of sperm are actually anywhere between 75 to 400 million per ejaculation. So, it might be a small percentage, but it certainly is not a small number of cells. Now, sperm motility, the ability for the sperm, because once they are deposited into the female reproductive tract, they need to swim up to the egg cell. And the environment really needs to be suitable for those sperm to be able to move freely. One of the factors or one of the parameters that becomes important is the pH. The female reproductive tract is pretty acidic, and so that can hinder the movement of the sperm. pH in the, sperm motility, the movement of the sperm requires a pH of about 7.5, which is on the basic side, the more alkaline side of the pH scale, and also requires energy. Okay, those sperm are going to need energy to move and to swim. So the secretions that come from some of these accessory glands kind of help facilitate the movement of the sperm and promote them reaching their destination, which is the egg cell. So some of the secretions, for example, are going to help with the pH. Okay, there are things like bicarbonate and other secretions that are going to raise the pH inside of the vagina, which I mentioned is a pretty acidic place normally. So that'll help increase pH, making the sperm more able to move through. There are other secretions that assist with the deposition of sperm in the female reproductive tract, and again, also their ability to move around once inside. Now, these secretions are coming from essentially 3 different glands. One is the prostate gland, the second are the seminal vesicles, and we have the bulbourethral gland, and you can see the relative contributions from each one. So we have 30% from the prostate, 60% from the seminal vesicles, 5% from the bulbourethral gland, and then the other 5%, so if you're counting that, that's 95%, and then to complete the picture, the other 5% is the sperm cells themselves. Okay, so there's the 100. I mentioned in the beginning that we're going to be encountering a number of hormones along the way. Surprisingly, maybe to you, many of these hormones will be seen in both the male and the female reproductive systems. Exact same hormone, same names. Now, naturally, these hormones are going to have slightly different effects in males and females, but there are many that are overlapping, and we'll meet some here, and then when we get to the female side of things, we're going to see a lot of these again. So let's look at some of the male sex hormones, and we'll talk a little bit about puberty, since that's very hormonally driven. So puberty begins when a special set of hormones called gonadotropins are released from the pituitary gland in the brain. Remember that pituitary, hypothalamus, pituitary. So this is going to happen for males at least. Probably between the ages of 10 to 12 or so. Okay, so there's, that's about when puberty starts for a majority of males. And so these gonadotropins are kind of the starting point and really the platform after which everything will follow. Reproductive function in males is regulated basically by three areas. We have the hypothalamus and pituitary, so that's a source of hormones, and then the gonads themselves. All right, so the testes, in other words, are also going to secrete hormones. So the hypothalamus produces a hormone. And remember how the hypothalamus and pituitary work, right? They're partners. And so the hypothalamus starts everything by producing what's called the gonadotropin-releasing hormone. All of these hormones have an abbreviation of some type, and you can use the abbreviation. Okay, it might help to kind of try to remember, maybe part of the name or at least what it does. But so we have the GnRH, that's from the hypothalamus. That gonadotropin releasing hormone stimulates the pituitary. Okay, that's how they work together. Stimulates the pituitary to release two hormones. Okay, so the following two hormones are pituitary hormones. One is follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, and the other one is called luteinizing hormone, abbreviated LH. And if you look at the picture on the right, we kind of went through this negative feedback loop idea. I'm not going to go over it again right now, but you can see kind of a similar thing happening to when I showed you back with the endocrine system. We looked at I think it was the thyroid gland that we had in our example, but same idea. Okay, so you have the stimulatory and the inhibitory signals kind of going around in a loop. All right, so now once we have the FSH and the LH from the pituitary, the luteinizing hormone stimulates the testes. Okay, so because remember, hormones, you've got something that's released all the way up in the pituitary, and those hormones travel through the blood. Okay, and this is one of the advantages, because that luteinizing hormone is affecting something way, way down from where it, from its point of origin. Stimulates the testes to secrete what are called androgens, and that's just kind of a generic term for male hormones, but the main male hormone is going to be testosterone, and it's going to be in quite high levels, as directed by a number of things. The FSH then, so the luteinizing hormone stimulates the secretion of the androgens, and then the follicle stimulating hormone helps the testosterone in terms of stimulating the testes to produce sperm. Okay, so those two hormones together are basically, the LH is stimulating the secretion of the testosterone, and then the follicle stimulating is facilitating that testosterone in terms of its role in the production of sperm. Now, we mentioned before that testosterone is the main male hormone. And so some of the things that it's going to regulate or affect in males specifically is number one, the development and enlargement of the reproductive organs, ducts, and glands. Okay, and particularly during puberty, we see a growth and a little bit more of a development of these structures. The second bullet point is listing some of the secondary sex characteristics that are going to start to show in males. And again, starting around the time of puberty. So body hair, a little bit of a coarser skin texture, increased sebaceous gland secretion, so oil secretion, growth of the larynx, which accounts for the voice change, the deeper voice that we very often hear around puberty time, growth spurts, increases in muscle mass, increases in metabolism, so they're using energy faster, and also an increase in the red blood cell count. RBC is red blood cell. And then finally, testosterone has a hand in the spermatogenesis, which we covered earlier. Okay, the development of the sperm from the spermatogonium all the way through to the actual sperm cell. Okay, so that is the first part of reproductive system, and I'll post part 2 where we'll pick up with the female reproductive system.